Hi guys, I'm glad you're here. Before we begin, I'm curious, where are you listening from right now, and what time is it for you? I always find it fascinating to imagine someone lying in bed in the middle of the night on one side of the world, while another is sitting quietly on a sunlit porch somewhere else, both hearing the same story at the same time. Wherever you are, make yourself comfortable. This is a journey through the moments in history when humanity stood closer than ever to the end of everything. And yet somehow, life continued. You might think of the end of the world as a sudden, dramatic event. A meteor streaking through the sky, the ground shattering beneath you, or a great wall of fire swallowing everything. But in reality, some of the closest brushes we've had with extinction were quiet at first. They began with whispers, with rumors in marketplaces, with strange changes in the air that only the most observant noticed. And by the time the danger became clear, it was already too late to stop it. All that remained was to survive. One of the earliest moments that could have ended civilization happened more than 74,000 years ago, when the Toba supervolcano erupted in what is now Indonesia. Imagine a morning when the sky turned an odd shade before sunrise, a bruised purple and copper, as though the sun was struggling to pierce through something heavy and alien. People living far away from the volcano didn't know what had happened. They woke in their small huts of wood, reeds, or animal hide, cooked breakfast over low fires, perhaps roasted roots, strips of dried meat, or a thick porridge of whatever grain they had stored, and noticed the air seemed colder than it should be. The smell of ash traveled on the wind, long before the ash itself began to fall. In small coastal villages, fishing boats still set out before dawn. Men pushed their wooden canoes into the water, oars dipping quietly into the dark sea. They spoke little, partly out of habit, partly because their voices sounded strange in the heavy, muffled air. Out at sea, they would haul in nets of silver-scaled fish, the same as always, but when they returned hours later, they found the shoreline coated in a fine gray dust. It clung to their skin and tasted faintly bitter. Over the coming days, the dust thickened, until the sun disappeared entirely. At midday, the world was dim and cold, as though winter had arrived in a single night. What no one could see was that the eruption had thrown so much ash and sulfur into the atmosphere that the climate itself began to shift. Across vast distances, harvests failed. In the hills, women gathered berries that were smaller and sourer than before. In grasslands, herds of animals wandered further and further in search of food, growing thin. Hunters noticed frost on the ground earlier in the year than ever before, and some mornings they found birds lying still, their feathers dusted with ash. People didn't understand that they were living through a catastrophe that might wipe them out entirely. They only knew that every day was harder than the last. Families moved from village to village, hoping to find better land or warmer skies. Some survived by finding caves and storing food in the cool darkness, sharing fires and telling stories deep into the night, stories about how the sun would one day return. Others simply disappeared, their camps abandoned, cooking pots cold and still. And yet, they did survive. Somehow, humanity shrank to perhaps only a few thousand people worldwide, a breath away from disappearing, and then slowly, painfully began to grow again. We will never know the names of those who lived through it, or what they felt as the sky remained dark for years. But because they endured, we are here. Thousands of years later, the world would face new threats, not from nature alone, but from itself. Long after Toba, when cities had risen, kings had ruled, and empires had fallen, the idea of the end of the world would take new forms. Plagues that moved silently from city to city. Wars fought with weapons that could destroy entire landscapes. Even moments when a single human decision could have unleashed devastation unlike anything before. But before we go there, imagine again that distant morning, when the first faint dust settled on a fisherman's hands. He might have looked up at the sky, noticed the sun's strange halo, and thought nothing of it. The end of the world doesn't always announce itself with a roar. Sometimes, it arrives like a slow, quiet shadow. Centuries passed, and humanity, scattered and small after the ancient disasters, learned to grow again. Villages became towns, towns became cities, and the memory of times when the sky turned black lived only in stories told around fires. People thought of the end of the world as something that belonged to myths, the anger of gods, the wrath of spirits, or the punishment for forgotten sins. But sometimes, history has a way of repeating itself in new and terrifying forms. It was the middle of the 14th century when another silent enemy began to creep across the continents. It did not come with fire or earthquakes. It did not blot out the sun. It arrived in the holds of ships, hidden among sacks of grain, in the fleas clinging to the fur of rats. In the port cities along the Black Sea, merchants loaded and unloaded goods, silk, spices, ceramics, and thought little of the strange sickness that had begun to trouble some sailors. A fever here, a cough there, perhaps a swelling beneath the skin. But the swells grew dark and painful, and within days the afflicted were gone. When the ships left port, they carried more than their cargo. They carried the Black Death, the bubonic plague, into the heart of Europe, the Middle East, and beyond. In bustling marketplaces, the air was thick with the smell of baked bread, roasted meat, and spices from far lands. Street vendors called out prices in loud, confident voices. But somewhere in the crowd, a man stumbled, clutching his side, his face pale. He was taken home, and within days so was half his family. The plague moved faster than anyone could understand. In small villages, the bell in the church tower rang constantly, marking the dead. Gravediggers worked from dawn until the last light faded, and still the bodies lay unburied. People tried to flee, believing the sickness was tied to the place they were in. They took to the roads, carrying bundles of clothing, bread wrapped in cloth, small coins hidden in their pockets. But as they traveled, they carried the plague with them, spreading it into the very towns they hoped would be safe. Life changed in ways that felt both sudden and endless. Bakers still rose early to knead dough, but many found no customers left alive to buy it. Inns kept their doors shut, their signs swinging silently in the wind. Children wandered the streets alone, too young to understand why no one came to take them home. The air smelled of burning herbs, as people lit fires in the hope that smoke would drive away the sickness. Priests walked with incense, muttering prayers, while some claimed the end of days had truly come. And in a way it almost had. Historians believe the Black Death killed as much as half of Europe's population within just a few years. Entire villages vanished from the maps. Fields lay unplowed, houses collapsed into the earth, and roads overgrew with grass. For those who survived, the silence of the world was almost as frightening as the plague itself. Imagine standing in the middle of a marketplace where once hundreds of voices shouted, and hearing only the flap of a torn banner in the wind. Yet even here, in the shadow of mass death, life clung stubbornly to the edges. Farmers who survived found more land to work. Orphans formed new households together, sharing food and skills. Markets reopened, slowly at first, with traders eyeing one another warily over sacks of grain. The cities would rebuild, but the memory of the plague stayed deep in their bones, a reminder that the world could end quietly, without fire or thunder. And the Black Death was only one form the end could take. In later centuries, humanity would build weapons powerful enough to bring destruction in minutes instead of months. There would be moments when a single command could erase millions of lives. But before those machines existed, the Earth itself had other plans. Plans that could once again change the course of history in the blink of an eye. It was in 1815, on the island of Sumbawa in Indonesia, when Mount Tambora erupted. The explosion was so violent that it could be heard over 1,000 miles away. Villagers near the mountain saw the night turn to day as lightning flashed within the rising plume of ash. The sound was deafening, like the sky itself had split open. The air filled with choking dust, and within hours, entire towns were buried. The eruption killed tens of thousands directly, but its reach extended far beyond the island. Ash drifted across the globe, cooling the earth. The year that followed became known as the Year Without a Summer. In North America and Europe, snow fell in June. Crops withered in the fields. Rivers froze where they had never frozen before. People in distant lands, who had never even heard of Tambora, starved because of it. They woke in the morning to skies the color of lead and frost on the ground where green should have been. In New England, farmers slaughtered livestock early, knowing they would not survive the coming months. In Ireland, the potato crop failed, leading to famine. And in villages across China, families dug roots from the frozen soil, boiling them into thin soups. It was another reminder that the end of the world doesn't have to arrive everywhere at once. It can start in a place no one has heard of, with a sound no one recognizes, and still change the fate of millions. By the time the 19th century gave way to the 20th, humanity had mastered machines that could cross oceans in days, light up cities through the night, and speak across continents in minutes. Progress felt unstoppable, and with it came a belief, perhaps even an arrogance, that the old threats of nature could be tamed. Volcanoes, plagues, and famines were now seen as tragedies of the past, things to be read about in history books rather than feared in the streets. But the new century would prove that the greatest danger was no longer the earth beneath our feet or the sky above our heads. It was ourselves. The First World War began as a regional conflict but quickly consumed nations like dry grass catching fire. Millions of young men left their homes. Cities, villages, farms, and boarded trains bound for the front. They carried letters from mothers and sweethearts, bread and cheese wrapped in cloth, maybe a lucky coin or photograph tucked into a pocket. Many believed they would be home by Christmas. But as the months dragged on, home became a distant memory. Life in the trenches was a narrow strip of mud between walls of sandbags, the air heavy with the smell of damp earth, unwashed bodies, and the sharp sting of gunpowder. It was not just bullets and shells that killed. In 1918, as the war staggered toward its end, another enemy emerged, silent, invisible, and far more deadly. The influenza pandemic began spreading among soldiers in crowded camps and barracks. It followed them home when they returned on ships and trains, and in only a few months it had circled the globe. Unlike most illnesses, it struck the young and healthy hardest. In cities, trams rattled down streets lined with shuttered shops. Coffins were stacked in churches. Neighbors left food on doorsteps without knocking, afraid to breathe the same air as those inside. Entire households fell ill overnight, and by morning, the streets were quieter than anyone could remember. By the time it faded, the influenza pandemic had killed more than the war itself. It was a reminder that even as humans learned to build empires and wage wars with industrial power, they remained fragile in the face of things they could not see. But the true moments when humanity teetered on the edge of total destruction would not come until later, when science and politics collided in ways the world had never seen. The Second World War brought devastation on a scale so vast that it felt as though the very structure of civilization might crumble. Cities once proud with centuries of history, Warsaw, Dresden, Tokyo, were reduced to smoking rubble in a single night. In the winter of 1945, as snow fell on the ruins of Europe, there was the quiet dread that the war was not ending so much as changing form. Because in a laboratory thousands of miles away, the first atomic bomb had already been built. When it was dropped on Hiroshima, witnesses described a flash brighter than the sun, followed by a heat that stripped paint from buildings and turned skin to ash in seconds. Streets were erased, people reduced to shadows burned into stone. Days later, another city, Nagasaki, suffered the same fate. The world had entered a new era, one in which the end could come not in years or months, but in minutes. In the years that followed, the atomic bomb became the centerpiece of a terrifying balance. Nations raced to build larger, more powerful weapons. Submarines patrolled the oceans with missiles capable of wiping out millions before anyone even knew they were coming. Governments built underground bunkers stocked with food, water, and radio equipment, while families were told to keep canned goods and batteries in their basements. School children in American classrooms practiced duck and cover drills, crouching beneath their desks, as if thin sheets of wood could shield them from the fire of the sun. The danger was not just in the weapons themselves, but in how close they came to being used. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the world stood just a breath away from nuclear war. For 13 days, military commanders, political leaders, and ordinary citizens lived under the shadow of a decision that could have ended civilization. In Washington, Maps marked the ranges of Soviet missiles stationed in Cuba. In Moscow, generals calculated the response to an American invasion. Around kitchen tables everywhere, people whispered about where they might go if the sirens sounded, though deep down, they knew there would be nowhere to run. In those tense October days, a Soviet submarine patrolling near Cuba came under pressure from U.S. forces. Believing they might already be at war, the crew considered launching a nuclear torpedo. It was only because one man, Vasily Arkhipov, refused to authorize the strike that the world was spared. His decision was quiet, unseen, and yet it may have saved more lives than any battle in history. Even after the crisis passed, the world did not truly breathe easier. The weapons remained, silent and waiting. The tension lingered like a low hum beneath everyday life. People still went to work, children still played in the streets, markets still bustled with the smell of bread and coffee and fresh fruit. But in the background, there was always the knowledge that, somewhere far away, a chain of events could begin that would end it all before the day was done. And the most unsettling truth was this: the end did not need to come from war. There were other forces, still beyond human control, that could change the planet in ways no weapon could match. In the decades that followed the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Cold War settled into an uneasy rhythm. Not peace, but a long, tense silence. The world cities glowed with neon and television screens, factories hummed with industry, and pop songs floated from radios. But somewhere under all of it was the awareness that humanity's survival was balanced on a thread. Behind closed doors, governments planned for a war they hoped would never come. It wasn't only the famous crises that nearly brought us to the brink. Some moments passed almost unnoticed at the time, revealed only years later when classified files were opened. One of the most chilling took place in 1983, on a quiet night in a Soviet early warning bunker. The man on duty, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov, sat before glowing screens that tracked the skies for any sign of a nuclear strike. Outside, the September air was cool, the hum of the underground facility broken only by the faint tapping of keys and the rustle of paper reports. Then the alarm blared. The system reported that several American missiles were on their way toward the Soviet Union. The red lights flashed, the sirens wailed, and the protocol was clear. Petrov was to report the incoming attack immediately, which would trigger a counterstrike. That counterstrike, in turn, would almost certainly start a full-scale nuclear war. But something didn't feel right. Petrov knew the satellites had given false readings before. He hesitated, watching the screen, his hands cold against the console. Minutes passed, the longest of his life, until it became clear there were no missiles at all. The system had mistaken the reflection of sunlight off clouds for an attack. His decision to call it a false alarm may have saved the world, though almost no one knew his name for decades. Even without human error, the weapons themselves carried danger. In 1980, in the U.S. state of Arkansas, a technician accidentally dropped a wrench inside a missile silo. The tool struck the missile, causing a fuel leak. The Titan II missile housed a warhead powerful enough to level much of the region. Firefighters and engineers worked through the night to contain the disaster, breathing in fumes that burned their throats. Eventually, the missile exploded, blasting the silo's massive steel doors into the air. Miraculously, the warhead did not detonate, but the incident was a reminder that the end could come not with strategy or malice, but with a simple mistake. The Cold War also saw the creation of hidden cities and underground complexes designed for survival after the unthinkable. Deep beneath mountains, vast chambers were stocked with food, medical supplies, and communications gear. In some, artificial lights mimicked day and night to keep inhabitants from losing track of time. Fresh air was pumped in through filters, and generators rumbled steadily in the background. These places were never meant to be comfortable, only functional. Rows of metal bunks, the faint metallic taste of stored water, the constant sense of being sealed away from the living world above. Ordinary life continued above ground, though it often brushed against this hidden reality. In London, commuters hurried through the underground, unaware that some of the tunnels had been reinforced as shelters decades earlier. In Moscow, metro stations doubled as bomb shelters, their marble halls designed not just for beauty but for survival. In American suburbs, people built backyard fallout shelters, stacking shelves with canned beans, powdered milk, and water drums. Some decorated them with rugs and playing cards, trying to make them feel less like tombs. And yet, for all the preparation, there were threats that could not be stopped by concrete walls. The same year Petrov made his decision, another danger was silently brewing far to the north, in a place few people ever thought about: the Soviet nuclear-powered satellite Cosmos 954. When it malfunctioned, it began to lose altitude, drifting toward Earth. Inside its metal shell was a reactor loaded with uranium-235. No one knew exactly where it would come down. In January 1978, it streaked across the Canadian sky before scattering radioactive debris over hundreds of kilometers in the Northwest Territories. The search for the fragments, called Operation Morning Light, lasted months. Teams in heavy protective gear combed forests and frozen lakes, guided by radiation detectors that clicked steadily in the quiet. The pieces they found were small, some no larger than coins, but each carried enough radiation to make bare exposure dangerous. If the satellite had come down over a city, the disaster could have been far worse. These near misses, these small twists of luck, were the invisible scaffolding on which the late 20th century balanced. People still went about their days, buying bread in warm bakeries, watching movies in dark theaters, laughing at jokes told over dinner tables. But the truth was that more than once, the world had been one wrong decision, one failed circuit, one falling tool away from catastrophe. And all the while, nature was still at work. Far beneath the ocean floor, in the shifting plates of the Earth's crust, pressure built silently. In the frozen layers of the Arctic, methane gas lay trapped like a coiled spring. In the vastness of space, asteroids passed within a cosmic hair's breadth of Earth without anyone noticing until they had gone. The danger wasn't just human-made. It was woven into the planet's existence. It's tempting to think of the end as a sudden, singular event, but in truth, the history of near-apocalypses is a tapestry of moments, some loud and public, others quiet and forgotten. And as the 20th century moved toward its close, humanity would face yet another kind of test, one where the threat came not from war or the natural world, but from a place no one expected. By the end of the Cold War, many believed the worst was over. The Berlin Wall had fallen, treaties were signed, and television screens showed celebrations in city squares where, for decades, there had been soldiers and barbed wire. The shadow of nuclear war seemed to fade, and for the first time in generations, there was talk of a new world order, one where nations could focus on trade, technology, and exploration instead of preparing for the end. But the truth is, history rarely allows comfort to last for long. While the world relaxed its guard, threats emerged in places few had thought to look. Deep inside reactors, under city streets, and even in the air people breathed. One of the most chilling examples came from the quiet forests of northern Ukraine in the spring of 1986. The town of Pripyat was young, only built in the 1970s to house workers of the nearby Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Life there was ordinary, almost idyllic by Soviet standards. Apartment blocks stood in neat rows, children played on bright blue swings, grocery stores sold bread still warm from their ovens, and on weekends, families filled the cinema or strolled along tree-lined boulevards. The reactor at Chernobyl was a point of pride, a symbol of the future. On April 26th at 1:23 in the morning, during a routine safety test, something went terribly wrong. Inside the control room, the air was filled with the soft click of switches, the murmur of engineers, the steady hum of machinery. Then the reactor's power surged far beyond safe limits. In seconds, the heat split the fuel rods, creating an explosion that blew the roof apart and sent a plume of radioactive material into the night sky. In Pripyat, most people slept through it. Some were woken by the distant thump of the blast but assumed it was nothing unusual. In the morning, children walked to school under a blue sky while invisible particles of cesium and iodine drifted around them. People queued for bread, went fishing in the river, hung laundry on balconies, all unaware that the air, the water, even the soil beneath their feet was becoming dangerous to touch. It took hours before buses began to arrive for evacuation. Loudspeakers told residents to pack only essentials for what was said to be a temporary move. Many left their homes expecting to return in a few days. They never would. By nightfall, the streets were empty, the playground silent, dishes still sitting on kitchen tables as if dinner had only just been interrupted. Chernobyl's radioactive cloud did not respect borders. It drifted over Belarus, Scandinavia, and Western Europe, carried by winds high above the ground. In some places, farmers were told to destroy crops, hunters to burn the meat of animals, children to stay indoors. If the wind had shifted differently, millions more could have been exposed. The disaster was a reminder that the end of the world, or at least the end of life as people know it, can begin in a single room with a single mistake. And Chernobyl was not the only reactor to have brought us close to catastrophe. In 1979, the 3 Mile Island plant in Pennsylvania experienced a partial meltdown. Though far less destructive, it created widespread panic. Residents within a 5-mile radius were told to leave, and even decades later, the name carries a shadow. But danger isn't always announced by alarms or explosions. Sometimes it comes in waves so small, so invisible, that no one notices until it's already everywhere. In 2003, a new strain of coronavirus, SARS, emerged in China, carried by air travelers across continents before anyone realized its reach. It was contained, but the incident showed how fast modern transportation could spread an illness worldwide. It was a warning, one that the world would fail to fully heed. Less than 2 decades later, the COVID-19 pandemic proved how fragile global systems truly were. Cities that had been alive with movement and sound became ghostly overnight. Planes sat idle on runways, streets were empty except for the occasional delivery truck, and even the busiest markets in the world fell silent. The danger wasn't just the disease itself, but the ripple effect. Supply chains breaking, economies shaking, tensions rising. For the first time in living memory, the entire planet faced the same invisible threat at the same time. And yet, as history shows, people adapt. In every apartment, in every village, in every house lit by candles or screens, life tried to reshape itself. Families learned to bake bread at home, neighbors left groceries at each other's doors, musicians played from balconies to streets below. Even in fear, there was creativity and stubbornness, the human refusal to simply stop. But as much as pandemics, nuclear accidents, and global crises remind us of our vulnerability, there is another category of threat entirely. One that does not come from human error or viral evolution, but from the vast, indifferent universe itself. Because sometimes, the end can come from a place so far away that we can barely imagine it, until the sky itself brings the warning. For most of history, people have looked at the night sky with wonder, not fear. The stars seemed eternal, steady points of light that could be counted on to guide travelers and mark the seasons. But hidden among them are objects that do not stay fixed, wandering bodies of rock and ice, some no larger than a bus, others the size of mountains, all hurtling through space at unimaginable speeds. On the morning of June 30th, 1908, in the remote Siberian wilderness near the Podkamenia Tunguska River, something arrived from that silent sky. It was just after 7 a.m. Local hunters and herders saw a streak of fire cutting across the dawn, brighter than the sun. Moments later, an explosion tore through the forest with the force of hundreds of Hiroshima bombs. Trees for hundreds of square kilometers were flattened, their trunks pointing outward like the spokes of a wheel. The heat was so intense that some were scorched black where they stood. No crater was ever found. Scientists now believe it was a small asteroid or comet that exploded in the atmosphere before hitting the ground, releasing its energy in a massive airburst. Had it arrived just a few hours later, it might have struck over St. Petersburg, then one of the largest cities in the Russian Empire. Millions could have died in an instant, and the 20th century might have unfolded very differently. That was not the last time Earth narrowly avoided such a fate. In 2013, over the Russian city of Chelyabinsk, a meteor about 20 meters wide entered the atmosphere without warning. It exploded high above the ground, creating a shockwave that shattered windows across 6 cities and injured over 1,000 people. Many were hurt not by the blast itself, but by glass exploding inward from the pressure wave. The meteor had been invisible to telescopes until it was already upon us, approaching from the direction of the sun. Even larger objects pass close by more often than we'd like to think. In 2004, astronomers discovered an asteroid named Apophis and calculated a small but real chance it could strike Earth in 2029. The news spread quickly, headlines spoke of doomsday rock, and computer simulations showed catastrophic impacts. Later measurements ruled out that date, but Apophis will still pass so close that it will come inside the orbit of some satellites. In cosmic terms, that is a near miss. And then there are threats we cannot see at all. Not solid rocks, but storms of charged particles from our own sun. In September 1859, a British astronomer named Richard Carrington observed a sudden, intense burst of light on the solar surface. Hours later, the Earth was hit by the most powerful geomagnetic storm in recorded history. Telegraph lines sparked and caught fire, operators received electric shocks, and the aurora lit up the skies as far south as the Caribbean. If a storm of that magnitude happened today, it could cripple satellites, knock out power grids across continents, and disrupt communication for months. In 2012, such a solar eruption did occur, but it missed Earth by just 9 days. Had our planet been in a slightly different position in its orbit, we might have been plunged into a technological blackout unlike anything in modern history. Space agencies now track thousands of near-Earth objects and monitor the sun's activity, but the truth is that our defenses are minimal. A large enough asteroid could be detected too late for any deflection mission, and a solar storm travels so fast that we would have hours at best to prepare. Even with warning, what does preparation look like for something that could cover an entire hemisphere? Yet, these cosmic dangers have their own strange beauty. Imagine a clear night, far from city lights, with the Milky Way stretched like a silver ribbon across the sky. Somewhere out there, chunks of rock that have wandered for millions of years pass silently within cosmic inches of our world. Most will never touch us. A few will enter our atmosphere, streaking as harmless meteors. But every so often, one reminds us that the space above is not empty, and that we live on a moving target in a vast shooting gallery. And it isn't only what comes from above that can threaten us. The Earth itself has a long memory, and it can turn against its inhabitants in ways far more violent than anything humans can imagine. Volcanic eruptions, for example, have changed the course of history, darkening skies for years, killing harvests, and toppling empires. One eruption, in particular, nearly erased humanity itself, tens of thousands of years before any written history. That story begins in a place now called Sumatra, with a mountain that once shook the entire planet. About 74,000 years ago, long before cities, ships, or even agriculture, there was a mountain in what is now Indonesia. It rose above the lush forests of Sumatra, its slopes thick with vegetation, rivers cutting down its sides toward the sea. Life around it would have seemed timeless. Small human bands moving through the jungle, hunting deer and gathering fruits, while great herds of elephants and other animals roamed the plains beyond. But beneath that serene surface, inside the earth, pressure was building. The mountain was Toba, and what happened there is still considered one of the largest volcanic eruptions in the last 2 million years. When it finally gave way, the force was so great that the entire top of the mountain was blown apart. The eruption sent columns of ash 50 kilometers into the sky. Rivers of molten rock surged down its slopes, and the sound of the blast would have carried for hundreds of miles. It didn't stop after a single explosion. It went on for days, pouring so much ash into the atmosphere that it blotted out the sun across much of the world. Fine volcanic particles circled the planet, reflecting sunlight away and triggering what scientists call a volcanic winter. Global temperatures are thought to have dropped several degrees for years afterward. In many regions, plants withered, animals starved, and the humans who depended on them followed. Genetic studies suggest that humanity may have come dangerously close to extinction in the aftermath. Some researchers believe our population could have dropped to as few as a few thousand individuals, scattered, isolated groups clinging to survival in places where food still grew. For those humans, every day must have felt like walking along the edge of the end. Hunting parties would have returned with less and less, mothers would have tried to feed children with roots and scraps, and fires would have burned small in the darkness, their smoke barely rising into the ash-filled air. Eruptions like Toba's are rare, but they are not confined to the distant past. In 1815, the volcano Mount Tambora, also in Indonesia, erupted with such force that it was heard over 1,600 kilometers away. The following year became known in the Northern Hemisphere as the Year Without a Summer. Frost struck in June, crops failed, and famine spread across multiple continents. Even Europe, far from the eruption site, saw food riots in the streets. Volcanoes are reminders that the ground beneath our feet is not solid in the way we think. It moves, shifts, and sometimes breaks. The same processes that make continents drift and mountains rise can, under the right conditions, create disasters that span the globe. But while volcanoes and asteroids are visible, measurable, and, at least in theory, predictable, there is another kind of threat that hides beneath the surface, one that is harder to see coming. It moves silently through the deep, through the black water of the oceans, and when it rises, it can erase entire coastlines in hours. On December 26, 2004, a massive earthquake struck beneath the Indian Ocean, off the coast of Sumatra, not far from where Toba once erupted. The ocean floor shifted violently, displacing billions of tons of water. Within minutes, walls of water began racing outward from the epicenter. Some were as high as buildings, moving at the speed of a jet plane. On the beaches of Thailand, Sri Lanka, and India, tourists and locals alike noticed the sea pulling back, exposing stretches of sand that were never usually visible. Children ran to pick up fish flopping in the newly exposed shallows, not realizing what was coming. Minutes later, the tsunami struck. Entire villages were swept away in moments. Boats were carried kilometers inland. In the end, over 200,000 people across 14 countries were dead or missing. The sheer scale of destruction stunned the world, but what was even more sobering was the realization of how little warning there had been. The earthquake had been detected, yes, but there was no effective system in place to warn those in its path. In the years since, monitoring networks have improved, and tsunami sirens now stand along many coasts. But the deep ocean still holds its secrets, and quakes of that magnitude can strike with almost no notice. And the danger is not confined to the Indian Ocean. Any coastline bordering a tectonic boundary is vulnerable. Yet, if there is a pattern in history, it is that humanity survives barely sometimes and learns. We put up watchtowers after floods, reinforce buildings after quakes, monitor skies after meteors pass too close. And still, there is always something new waiting beyond the horizon. The next threat I'm going to tell you about didn't come from the ground, the sky, or the sea. It came from inside a laboratory, born from a race between nations to master forces no one had ever touched before. It was not an accident, and it was not nature. It was human ambition pushing against the limits of safety. What happened could have ended everything before most people even realized what was happening. By the middle of the 20th century, humanity had finally learned to split the atom, and with that knowledge came the ability to unleash energy greater than any volcano, earthquake, or meteor strike in recorded history. The Second World War ended with 2 mushroom clouds over Japan, and the world understood that something irreversible had begun. But those bombs, devastating as they were tiny compared to what came next. In the years that followed, the United States and the Soviet Union entered a dangerous race, each trying to outmatch the other with ever more powerful nuclear weapons. The early tests were conducted on remote islands or deserts, but even thousands of kilometers away, people could feel the effects. Windows shattered on nearby ships. Clouds of radioactive dust drifted invisibly across oceans and continents. The largest bomb ever detonated was the Soviet Tsar Bomba in 1961. Dropped over Novaya Zemlya in the Arctic, it had a yield of 50 megatons, more than 3,000 times the power of the Hiroshima bomb. The fireball was so enormous it reached nearly into the stratosphere. The flash could be seen from over 1,000 kilometers away. Windows shattered in Norway and Finland. If it had been used on a city, there would have been nothing left within a radius of dozens of kilometers. But perhaps the closest the world has come to nuclear annihilation wasn't during an actual attack, but during moments of misunderstanding. On September 26, 1983, Soviet early warning systems reported that several American missiles had been launched toward the USSR. The protocol called for an immediate retaliatory strike. There would be no time for negotiation. The man in charge of monitoring the system that night was Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov. The alarms blared, the screens showed incoming warheads, and every piece of training told him to pass the warning up the chain. But something didn't feel right. The system showed only a handful of missiles, not the hundreds that would be expected in a real first strike. Petrov made a decision that went against all standing orders. He declared it a false alarm. He was right. The satellites had misread the reflection of sunlight on clouds as missile launches. If he had followed protocol, the Soviet leadership might have ordered an all-out counterattack, triggering a global nuclear war. Another close call came in 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis. American warships were enforcing a blockade around Cuba to stop Soviet ships from delivering nuclear missiles to the island. Deep beneath the waves, a Soviet submarine armed with a nuclear torpedo found itself cut off from communication, overheated, and under harassment from U.S. Navy depth charges. The submarine's captain believed war had already started and prepared to launch the weapon. On board, the decision required the agreement of 3 officers. 2 agreed. The third, Vasily Arkhipov, refused, convincing the captain to surface instead. That single refusal may have prevented a nuclear exchange. But these were not the only moments. In 1995, long after the Cold War had officially ended, Russian radar detected what looked like an incoming U.S. missile over Norway. The Russian military prepared their nuclear forces for launch. The briefcase containing launch codes, the nuclear football, was brought to President Boris Yeltsin. Only after tense minutes did they realize it was a scientific rocket studying the aurora, launched with full permission but somehow never communicated properly to Russian forces. The frightening truth is that the nuclear danger has never completely gone away. Even today, thousands of warheads remain on high alert, ready to be fired within minutes. The technology has improved, but so have the risks. Cyber attacks, system errors, or rogue actors could spark a disaster in ways no one foresaw in the 20th century. During the Cold War, many people lived with the quiet background fear that every day might be the last. Families built fallout shelters in their backyards, stocked with canned food, water, and Geiger counters. Schools taught children to duck and cover under desks, as if a wooden table could shield them from a nuclear firestorm. Cities planned evacuation routes that everyone knew would be useless in reality. And yet, life continued. People went to work, fell in love, raised children, all under the shadow of a possibility that a single mistake or miscalculation could erase everything. That strange combination of ordinary life and extraordinary danger is part of why the nuclear age still fascinates and terrifies us. But nuclear war is only one way human technology has threatened our own survival. Sometimes, danger comes not from an intentional weapon, but from something we don't fully understand, experiments on the edge of science, pushing into areas where the consequences might be far greater than we expect. One such event happened quietly, far from public view, in a research lab where scientists thought they were simply studying the laws of nature. What they discovered was that, in theory, they might have been seconds away from ending the world by accident. The year was 1942, and deep beneath the stands of an abandoned football stadium in Chicago, a group of scientists worked under conditions that were anything but ordinary. This was part of the Manhattan Project, the effort to build the world's first atomic bomb. But what they were doing that day was not assembling a weapon. They were trying to see if they could control a nuclear chain reaction for the first time in history. The device they were building didn't look like much to an outsider. No sleek metal casing, no blinking lights, no towering structure. It was essentially a pile, literally called Chicago Pile 1, made of graphite blocks stacked around uranium fuel. The men in lab coats moved quietly around it, climbing ladders to adjust wooden control rods coated with cadmium. The entire operation relied on math, theory, and a kind of cautious faith that they understood what they were about to do. But there was a shadow of fear that followed them. Theoretical discussions had taken place earlier in the war about whether splitting atoms could create a runaway chain reaction so intense that it might ignite the atmosphere or the oceans. The idea sounded absurd to most physicists, but there were equations, rough, uncertain, suggesting that under certain conditions it might be possible. Edward Teller, one of the project's leading minds, had once raised the concern with enough seriousness that it was briefly examined in detail. Could the detonation of a fission bomb set off an unstoppable reaction, fusing the nitrogen in the air or the hydrogen in seawater, turning the Earth itself into a burning star? Calculations by other scientists, including Hans Bethe, eventually concluded it was impossible, the energies weren't sufficient. But in the early 1940s, impossible was a word they used carefully. The physics was new, untested in the real world. On December 2, 1942, the experiment began. As the cadmium control rods were slowly withdrawn from the pile, the Geiger counters began to chatter. The scientists measured neutron flux, listening to the devices that told them how close they were to a self-sustaining reaction. At a certain point, the chattering became a steady roar in their headphones. The chain reaction was alive. It was the first controlled release of nuclear energy in history. The men shook hands quietly, aware they had just stepped over a threshold no one had crossed before. Chicago didn't glow, the atmosphere didn't ignite, and the oceans didn't boil away. But the fact that anyone had even considered such possibilities shows how close human curiosity can come to crossing into danger we don't fully comprehend. The same fear arose decades later in 2008, when the Large Hadron Collider LHC, the world's most powerful particle accelerator, prepared to smash protons together at near light speed beneath the French-Swiss border. Some critics warned that the collisions might produce microscopic black holes that could consume the Earth from the inside out, or create strange forms of matter that would transform everything they touched. Physicists pointed out, correctly, that cosmic rays with far greater energy than the LHC's collisions had been striking Earth for billions of years without incident. The chances of catastrophe were vanishingly small, but public imagination is not so easily calmed. On the day the machine was switched on, news outlets ran headlines about the end of the world in a mix of seriousness and mockery. Of course, nothing disastrous happened. The LHC went on to discover the Higgs boson, nicknamed the God particle, and further our understanding of the universe's building blocks. But the fear, justified or not, is part of a larger pattern. Each time humanity reaches for deeper knowledge, we also reach closer to forces we may not fully understand. Sometimes, the danger is not even in the experiment itself, but in what we do with the knowledge afterward. In the decades after the first nuclear chain reaction, the same physics that allowed us to power cities also gave us the ability to destroy them in seconds. The same genetic science that helps cure diseases can be used to create deadly biological weapons. And the same computer networks that connect the planet can be used to crash economies or disable infrastructure with a few lines of malicious code. One of the most unsettling truths in history is that we are often our own greatest threat. Nature has tried to end us before, with meteors, ice ages, and volcanic winters, but the last century has shown that human invention can create risks that nature never imagined. Yet, as frightening as science can be, the most immediate brushes with global catastrophe often come from the systems we create to manage our own societies, fragile political structures, economic webs, and chains of command where a single human decision can send shockwaves through the world. And sometimes, those decisions are made in the chaos of a night when no one is sure what's real and what's not. The next moment we'll explore happened not in a laboratory or a war room, but in a control center late at night, with exhausted staff, blinking screens, and the terrifying belief that the end might arrive in just minutes. It's a story where everything came down to a single phone call, and whether the voice on the other end would say yes or no. It was the middle of the night in November 1979, and deep inside the Cheyenne Mountain Complex in Colorado, the nerve center of NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, the routine hum of operations suddenly shattered. Screens lit up red, sirens wailed, and the duty officers stared at a display showing something no one ever wanted to see. Hundreds of Soviet nuclear missiles, inbound toward the United States. The room erupted in a controlled chaos that was anything but calm. Men and women in uniform grabbed phones, relaying the alert to higher commands. Fighter jets were placed on standby. The nuclear football, the briefcase containing the president's launch codes, was prepared. From this moment, the chain of decisions that could lead to a nuclear exchange had already begun. The data was clear, too clear. The system reported a massive, coordinated first strike. In the event of such an attack, U.S. policy allowed only minutes for detection, verification, and response. Any delay risked losing the ability to retaliate. Any hasty action risked starting an irreversible war. At that moment, the president's advisors were woken in the middle of the night. The gravity of the situation explained in clipped, urgent tones. In military command posts, officers waited with their fingers hovering over phones and consoles, ready to pass the orders no one wanted to give. And then, as quickly as it started, doubt began to creep in. The satellites outside Earth's atmosphere, part of the early warning network, showed no launches. Radar systems tracking the horizon found nothing. In the cold logic of missile detection, the incoming apocalypse existed only in the computer simulation on NORAD's main screen. The reason was almost absurd. A technician had accidentally loaded a training tape into the operational system, displaying a scenario for a massive Soviet strike as if it were happening in real life. The nightmare was over in minutes. But for those few minutes, the United States had been on the brink of ordering a counterstrike that could have ended civilization. This wasn't the only time a simple mistake brought the world to the edge. Just 4 years later, in June 1980, NORAD systems again reported incoming missiles. This time, only 2 at first, then more, then dozens. The alerts reached command centers, nuclear-armed bombers were readied, and again the chain reaction of decision-making began. This time, the culprit was a single faulty computer chip, worth less than $1, sending random attack signals through the system. Each time, cooler heads prevailed, but those heads belonged to individuals who were under unimaginable pressure, making decisions in a matter of minutes with incomplete information in the middle of the night. It's not hard to imagine how one wrong call could have set the world on fire. If you've ever wondered what the end of the world might actually look like in real time, it's not a massive countdown clock or a dramatic speech from a world leader. It's a quiet, tense room full of exhausted people staring at glowing screens, wondering if the blip they're looking at is real or a glitch. It's a phone ringing at 3 a.m., and the person answering having to decide whether to wake the president or not. It's the sharp awareness that, in this moment, they might be holding the lives of billions in their hands. The terrifying part is that these close calls don't fade away with history, they just evolve with the technology. In the 21st century, the same kind of false alarms can come from cyber attacks, from hacked satellites, from rogue signals bouncing through space in ways no one expects. The complexity of our detection systems has grown, but so has the number of ways they can fail. And sometimes the threat doesn't even come from mistakes in detection. It comes from people deliberately trying to provoke a reaction. In the murky world of intelligence operations, deception and manipulation can push rival nations toward the edge without firing a single shot. There are whispers in history of times when fabricated evidence of an attack was slipped into the right channels, just to see how the other side would respond. In the wrong circumstances, such a move could set the dominoes falling in a matter of minutes. The unsettling truth is that our systems for preventing catastrophe are run by people, and people get tired, stressed, overconfident, or distracted. In a way, we've been saved more often by luck, gut instinct, or a single skeptical officer than by the technology itself. And yet, not all brushes with the end have been about war. Sometimes, nature itself throws us into chaos, and the question becomes whether we can even survive the planet we live on. There's one moment in recent history when Earth gave us a sharp reminder of just how fragile our technological civilization is, and it happened in a way that most of the world never even noticed. It began not with an explosion, but with the sun. The sun is a giant, blazing sphere of plasma, burning constantly at temperatures far hotter than anything on Earth. Most days, it shines steadily, bathing the planet in warm light and making life possible. But every so often, the sun reminds us that it is a force of chaos, capable of throwing out storms so powerful they can shake the very fabric of our technology-dependent world. On July 23, 2012, the sun unleashed one of the most powerful solar storms ever recorded. A massive burst of charged particles and magnetic fields, a coronal mass ejection, shot toward Earth at nearly 3 million miles per hour. If that storm had arrived a week earlier, when Earth was directly in its path, the consequences could have been devastating. Satellites might have been fried, communications would have gone dark, power grids could have failed across continents. Planes in flight would have lost navigation systems. Pipelines and railways could have been disrupted. For days or weeks, the modern conveniences we take for granted might have vanished, replaced by darkness, silence, and confusion. Scientists say this event was the closest call in recent history to a technological apocalypse. What saved us was simply timing. Earth was out of the storm's direct path, just by a matter of days. The storm sped past, and life continued, mostly unnoticed. But in the years since, experts have warned that our world is far more vulnerable than we realize. The infrastructure that powers everything, from hospitals to banks to water treatment plants, depends on electricity and satellite signals. Unlike past generations, we cannot survive long without these systems. A major solar storm could push society into chaos. To prepare, governments and agencies have developed early warning systems and protocols. Power companies work on ways to isolate and protect the grid. Satellites are hardened against radiation. Yet, despite these measures, no one knows exactly how well we would cope with a worst-case scenario. The sun's fury is only one natural force we face. The Earth's own climate system has a way of shifting unpredictably, sometimes triggered by events far away or long ago. The ancient past shows cycles of ice ages, sudden warming, and extreme weather that reshaped continents and ecosystems. Modern science warns that humanity's impact on the climate could push us toward such tipping points, changes that may seem slow but could spiral out of control rapidly. In the early 21st century, heat waves, floods, droughts, and storms have increased in frequency and intensity. Some islands have disappeared beneath rising seas, and coastal cities now build defenses against tides that once seemed impossible. If certain feedback loops are triggered, such as the release of methane trapped in permafrost or the collapse of major ice sheets, the consequences could accelerate faster than we expect. Imagine a world where crops fail year after year, where water is scarce, where migrations swell as people search for safety. This isn't just science fiction. It's a plausible future based on the warnings of the world's leading scientists. And the question becomes not just whether nature can end the world, but whether we will survive the changes we have set in motion. But even if nature and technology don't finish the job, human societies themselves can threaten collapse. History shows civilizations rising and falling, often due to complex factors like resource depletion, conflict, and economic instability. The globalized world is tightly connected. A shock in one place can ripple across the planet. A single major financial crisis, pandemic, or political upheaval can trigger a cascade of failures. So, when we speak of the end of the world, it's not just about dramatic, singular disasters. It's a mosaic of risks, some fast, some slow, some sudden, some creeping. And often, the closest we come to annihilation is not a headline-grabbing explosion, but the quiet moments when countless small dangers align just so, leaving survival to chance and choice. The story of humanity's near misses is also a story of resilience, of how, time and again, we have rebuilt, adapted, and learned. But the deeper truth is that those near misses remind us how fragile our existence truly is. They ask a question that echoes across history and into the future. If the world could end, what would you do with the time left? While natural disasters and cosmic events pose sudden threats, some of the most profound dangers to humanity come not from explosions or storms, but from gradual unraveling within our own societies. History offers stark lessons of civilizations that grew mighty, then crumbled under the weight of internal decay, environmental stress, and relentless conflict, sometimes taking the entire known world down with them. Take the Roman Empire, for instance. At its peak, Rome stretched across continents, its armies patrolling the borders of an empire that spanned Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Its roads connected cities, its laws shaped cultures, and its cities boomed with markets, theaters, and forums alive with the chatter of citizens. People enjoyed banquets filled with exotic foods, chariot races, poetry readings, and public baths that were centers of social life. Yet beneath this grandeur, cracks were growing. Economic inequality widened as wealth concentrated in the hands of a few while peasants struggled to survive. Political power became a game of intrigue, corruption, and assassination. External pressures mounted as invading tribes pushed at the empire's borders, and internal divisions turned neighbor against neighbor. By the late 4th and early 5th centuries, Rome's strength was eroding. The infamous sack of Rome in 410 CE by the Visigoths sent shockwaves through the ancient world, a symbol that even the mightiest could fall. The city's streets, once bustling with life and commerce, echoed with fear and uncertainty. People who had never known war found themselves fleeing, trying to protect their families from violence and hunger. The collapse didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, grinding process of decline, yet one that changed the course of history forever. Similarly, the Mayan civilization of Central America thrived for centuries with incredible achievements in astronomy, architecture, and art. Cities with towering pyramids and vibrant markets flourished amidst jungles, filled with festivals, ball games, and religious ceremonies. But between the 8th and 9th centuries, many of these cities were mysteriously abandoned. Scholars believe a combination of drought, deforestation, warfare, and social upheaval led to their downfall. Like Rome, the collapse was not a single event, but a complex unraveling that left ruins where life had once pulsed vividly. Closer to modern times, the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 offers another example. The superpower was home to millions who lived in sprawling cities, worked in factories, and dreamed of a better future. Yet beneath the propaganda and the show of strength, systemic economic problems, political stagnation, and the desire for independence among various republics grew impossible to contain. The sudden fall surprised many, throwing the world into uncertainty and marking the end of a decades-long era of geopolitical tension. What lessons do these collapses hold? They reveal that societies depend on fragile networks of trust, resources, and cooperation. When these break down, the consequences can ripple outward, causing shortages, conflicts, and waves of migration. In a highly interconnected world, local failures can become global crises. And it's not just history. Today, experts warn of slow disasters like climate change, resource depletion, and economic inequality that could push societies toward instability. The tension between population growth and finite resources can create conditions ripe for conflict and collapse. Political divisions and misinformation can weaken democratic institutions. Cyber attacks threaten critical infrastructure. All these factors combine into a precarious balance that humanity must manage carefully. But unlike a sudden disaster, slow-burning crises are harder to grasp. They don't explode onto front pages or trigger immediate alarm. Instead, they creep through years and decades, testing the resilience of communities and governments. They challenge our ability to cooperate, plan ahead, and make sacrifices for the greater good, qualities that are not guaranteed in any society. In some ways, this makes them even more dangerous, because when problems seem distant or abstract, complacency grows. People return to their routines, eating, working, raising families, while the underlying risks increase. And by the time the warning signs become impossible to ignore, options for action may have narrowed drastically. Yet, amid these challenges, there are stories of hope and adaptation. Cities investing in renewable energy, communities developing sustainable agriculture, and international efforts aiming to reduce carbon emissions. The future is not fixed. It is shaped by choices made every day by individuals and societies alike. As we consider these slow threats, it's worth asking, how would a collapse really feel from the inside? What would people eat when supply chains break? How would they find water, shelter, safety? What stories would be told around fires as the modern world faded? History gives us glimpses. Refugees fleeing famine, families bartering goods, communities protecting each other from chaos. These human stories remind us that even when worlds end, life often finds a way to continue, shaped by resilience, hope, and the stubborn will to survive. One of the slowest, yet most devastating threats to humanity has always been disease. Long before cities and empires, humans faced invisible enemies in the form of pathogens, viruses, bacteria, and parasites that spread silently through populations, sometimes wiping out entire communities. While modern medicine has drastically changed the game, History shows us how quickly illness can turn from a localized problem into a catastrophe with global consequences. The Black Death, or bubonic plague, is one of the most infamous examples. Arriving in Europe in the mid-14th century, it traveled along trade routes from Asia and the Middle East, carried by fleas on rats hiding aboard ships and caravans. Cities that once bustled with life suddenly emptied as tens of millions died in just a few years. Some estimates suggest it wiped out between 30% and 60% of Europe's population. Markets closed, fields went untended, and social order collapsed in many regions. People ate less, prayed more, and tried to make sense of a world that seemed suddenly cruel and chaotic. The plague didn't just kill, it transformed societies. Labor shortages shifted power toward the working class, feudal systems began to weaken, and the sheer scale of death challenged established religious and social structures. The survivors inherited a changed world, one where old rules no longer applied. Fast forward to the 20th century, and humanity faced new pandemics with even greater potential for destruction. The 1918 influenza pandemic, often called the Spanish flu, infected about a third of the world's population and killed an estimated 50 million people. Unlike many diseases that primarily kill the very young or the very old, this flu disproportionately struck young adults in the prime of life. Soldiers returning from World War I unknowingly carried the virus across continents, turning cities and countryside alike into zones of sickness and death. Hospitals were overwhelmed, coffins ran short, and entire communities faced the grim reality that the world could fall apart in waves of coughing and fever. In recent decades, outbreaks such as HIV, AIDS, SARS, Ebola, and most recently COVID-19 have reminded us that pathogens can emerge suddenly, spread rapidly, and disrupt global systems. The COVID-19 pandemic, in particular, exposed vulnerabilities in supply chains, healthcare, and governance. Borders closed, economies shuttered, and social isolation became the norm. Millions died, but millions more survived, forever changed by the experience. What makes pandemics so frightening is their unpredictability. Viruses mutate, jump species, and travel in ways that defy human control. Despite advances in vaccines, treatments, and surveillance, a new pathogen with the right combination of contagiousness and lethality could still spark a global crisis. Scientists and governments prepare for the next one, but history shows that no amount of preparation can guarantee prevention. Imagine a world where a deadly virus spreads unchecked, not only killing millions but also crippling healthcare systems, halting transportation, and causing widespread panic. Schools and businesses close indefinitely. Emergency services are overwhelmed. The social fabric stretches thin as fear and misinformation spread faster than facts. Food supplies run low, and trust in institutions erodes. This scenario isn't science fiction. It has unfolded in varying degrees throughout history, and experts warn it could happen again. Yet, within this bleak outlook lies a deeper story of scientific breakthroughs, of communities rallying together, of sacrifices made by countless individuals working tirelessly to protect others. The human capacity to adapt and respond has saved us many times over, but the stakes have never been higher. What if a pandemic struck at the same time as other disasters, like a massive solar storm knocking out electricity or political instability fracturing nations? The cascading effects could be overwhelming, revealing how interconnected and fragile our world truly is. So, as we explore the many faces of near-apocalypse, it's clear that threats are rarely simple or isolated. They come intertwined, natural, technological, societal, and often amplified by one another. The future might bring challenges unlike anything humanity has faced before, requiring new kinds of cooperation, resilience, and wisdom. In the next part, we can dive into how technology itself, especially artificial intelligence, may present risks both known and unforeseen, creating new frontiers where the line between progress and peril blurs. In the final decades of the 20th century and the dawn of the 21st, humanity began building machines that could think, or at least mimic thinking. Artificial intelligence, once the stuff of science fiction, has become woven into daily life, guiding search engines, recommending music, translating languages, even piloting cars. The potential seemed limitless: tools to cure diseases, solve climate change, and expand human knowledge. But alongside the promises, shadows appeared. What if these creations outpaced our control? What if, in the pursuit of ever smarter machines, we unleashed something beyond our understanding or ability to stop? These questions have moved from fiction to serious debate among scientists, ethicists, and world leaders. One risk lies not in machines rising up as hostile overlords, but in their unintended consequences. Algorithms designed to maximize engagement have sometimes spread misinformation and polarization, undermining trust and fueling conflict. Automated systems controlling infrastructure, power grids, financial markets, transportation can be vulnerable to errors or hacking, leading to cascading failures. Then there are concerns about autonomous weapons. Drones and robots capable of making life-or-death decisions without human oversight. The possibility that machines might be programmed or hacked to target civilians or escalate conflicts poses chilling scenarios. Calls for international regulation and bans on lethal autonomous weapons have grown louder, but enforcement remains difficult. A deeper, more philosophical risk emerges when AI surpasses human intelligence in unpredictable ways, a point known as the singularity. At this threshold, machines could improve themselves rapidly, developing goals misaligned with human values or survival. While some experts believe this is decades or centuries away, others warn it could happen suddenly, without warning. Despite the risks, humanity is not powerless. Researchers worldwide work to develop safe AI, systems designed to align with human ethics and transparency. Efforts focus on ensuring AI decisions can be audited, that machines can explain their reasoning, and that control remains firmly in human hands. The story of AI's rise is still being written. It holds the promise of solving problems once thought intractable, unlocking cures for diseases, managing resources efficiently, and even exploring distant stars. But it also carries the weight of responsibility to understand what we create, how we use it, and the legacy we leave. History shows that every transformative technology carries both hope and danger. The printing press changed the flow of information, the steam engine reshaped economies, and nuclear power both lit cities and threatened annihilation. AI could be the next great leap or the next great risk. In this light, the future's greatest threat may not be a single event, but the complex, intertwined challenges we face as we create and inhabit an ever more fragile world. How will we navigate choices that affect billions of lives? How do we balance innovation with caution, power with wisdom? And amid this uncertainty, ordinary people continue their daily lives, working, loving, dreaming, often unaware of the invisible forces shaping their fate. It is this tension between the vast, impersonal threats and the intimate, human stories that makes history so compelling and so fragile. The next part can explore unexpected risks still hidden from view, from ecological tipping points to unknown viruses, to the unknown unknowns lurking just beyond our grasp. While many of the greatest dangers we face are visible or at least anticipated, history teaches us to fear the unknown, the threats lurking in shadows, concealed by complexity, distance, or our own limited understanding. These unknown unknowns might be silent, invisible forces waiting to tip the balance. Consider the deep oceans, covering over 70% of the planet, largely unexplored and still mysterious. Within these depths lie ecosystems vital to the global climate and human survival. Yet, they are threatened by pollution, warming, and acidification, changes that could trigger feedback loops accelerating climate shifts. Underwater methane deposits, for example, hold vast stores of greenhouse gases. If destabilized, they could escape into the atmosphere, drastically speeding global warming. Similarly, permafrost in the Arctic and subarctic regions acts as a vast natural freezer, locking away ancient organic matter. As temperatures rise, this frozen ground melts, releasing methane and carbon dioxide, potent greenhouse gases. Scientists worry that a tipping point could lead to rapid, uncontrollable warming, making current climate models obsolete. Beyond environmental risks, there are emerging biological threats. Genetic engineering and synthetic biology offer unprecedented ability to modify organisms, potentially curing diseases or feeding millions. But these tools could also be misused, accidentally or deliberately, to create new pathogens or ecological imbalances. The possibility of lab-created viruses escaping containment is a growing concern among experts. Even the microscopic world of microbes is not fully mapped. Antibiotic resistance is rising worldwide, threatening to turn once treatable infections into deadly diseases. New viruses jump from animals to humans with increasing frequency, driven by habitat destruction and global travel. Each new outbreak is a reminder of how fragile our defenses remain. Then there's the digital realm, cyberspace, an invisible battlefield where information, infrastructure, and power intersect. A coordinated cyber attack on power grids, financial systems, or communication networks could cripple nations without a single bomb dropped. As societies grow more dependent on interconnected technologies, vulnerabilities multiply, often unseen until exploited. All these hidden threats share a common trait: their potential to escalate quickly, overwhelming human systems designed for stability and control. And what makes them especially frightening is our limited ability to predict or prevent them. Models and simulations can help, but reality often surprises. History, in this sense, is a series of lessons on humility, about how much we don't know and how little control we sometimes have. Yet it is also a story of perseverance, creativity, and hope. The same curiosity that led to perilous experiments also drives discovery and innovation. The same social bonds that can break under pressure can also be the foundation for recovery and renewal. If history is our guide, the future will not be shaped by any single event, but by a complex web of interacting forces, natural and human-made, known and unknown. Each moment brings choices: to act or ignore, to prepare or hope for the best. And within those choices lies the fate of millions. Throughout history, when civilizations faced collapse or disaster, it was not just grand armies or leaders that determined the outcome. It was the countless individual stories of survival, resilience, and adaptation that shaped the future. When the old world crumbled, ordinary people had to find extraordinary ways to carry on. Take the inhabitants of Pompeii in 79 CE, for example. When Mount Vesuvius erupted suddenly, spewing ash and molten rock, thousands faced an unimaginable nightmare. Some fled, others hid. The city, once vibrant with merchants, artists, and families enjoying Mediterranean life, shopping in bustling forums, sharing meals of bread, olives, and wine, was frozen in time beneath meters of volcanic ash. The remains tell a haunting story of desperation, fear, and the fragile line between life and death. Yet, even in such disasters, survivors found ways to rebuild. Nearby towns absorbed refugees. Trade routes shifted. Life, with all its chaos and beauty, continued. Across the centuries, stories abound of communities rebuilding after floods, fires, famines. During the Great Famine of the early 14th century, as crops failed and hunger spread across Europe, people adapted in harsh ways. Diets changed: less meat, more roots and wild plants. Social bonds were tested as neighbors competed for scarce resources, but also forged new alliances to survive. Some turned to religious devotion. Others rebelled against authorities they blamed for their suffering. The fabric of society strained but did not tear completely. In more recent times, the survivors of the Second World War faced cities reduced to rubble, families torn apart, economies shattered. In Germany, Britain, Japan, and beyond, people faced shortages of food, housing, and hope. Yet, amid the ruins, they rebuilt schools, factories, and communities. Gardens grew in bombed-out lots. Children played among ruins while dreaming of peace. The baby boom that followed was a testament to resilience and renewal. Sometimes survival depended on shifting identities and roles. When empires collapsed, some adapted by embracing new powers or migrating to safer lands. Others held onto traditions, preserving culture in exile. The Jewish diaspora, for example, maintained identity and faith through centuries of displacement. The Roma people adapted through nomadic resilience and cultural preservation. At a smaller scale, families facing economic hardship learned to stretch meager resources, cooking meals from scraps, sharing homes, bartering skills and goods. Stories from the Great Depression in the 1930s reveal how communities organized soup kitchens, barter clubs, and mutual aid groups. Small acts that prevented complete despair. The human capacity for adaptation is often sparked by creativity as well. New tools, farming methods, or social arrangements can mean the difference between survival and collapse. Indigenous peoples, for example, developed intricate knowledge of local ecosystems to sustain life in harsh environments. Knowledge that has been vital in times of environmental change. Yet adaptation is not guaranteed. Sometimes, survival means making impossible choices. Who to save, what to leave behind, when to flee or fight. These decisions weigh heavily on individuals, and their consequences ripple through generations. In the face of collapse, people also tell stories. Stories that pass down wisdom, warning, and hope. Folklore, myths, and oral histories often carry echoes of past disasters, teaching lessons about respect for nature, community solidarity, or caution in the face of hubris. These narratives bind communities together, creating a sense of identity even amid uncertainty. The tension between fragility and resilience defines much of human history, and it continues today as modern societies face new and complex challenges. Yet, if there's one thread connecting past and present, it's this: even in the darkest moments, the will to survive and rebuild remains a powerful force. Decades ago, in the shadow of the Cold War, the city of Hiroshima was a place of vibrant life and deep culture. Families gathered around simple meals of rice, fish, and pickled vegetables. Children played in the streets while elders shared stories of the past. Then, on August 6, 1945, the world changed forever. At 8:15 a.m., a blinding flash tore through the sky as the first atomic bomb detonated over the city. The heat was so intense it vaporized everything in the blast radius: buildings, trees, people, turning the bustling urban landscape into a smoldering wasteland. Those who survived the initial explosion faced radiation sickness, burns, and long-term illness. Families were torn apart, entire neighborhoods vanished. Yet, from the ashes rose stories of incredible resilience. Survivors, known as hibakusha, rebuilt their city brick by brick, often while battling lingering health issues and social stigma. Gardens bloomed where rubble once lay, schools reopened, and businesses restarted. The people of Hiroshima carried a message of peace and the hope that such destruction would never happen again. Across the world, other communities faced their own crises. In New Orleans, Hurricane Katrina in 2005 overwhelmed levees and flooded vast areas, displacing hundreds of thousands. Families fled with little more than the clothes on their backs. Neighbors helped neighbors amid chaos. Relief efforts were slow and uneven, exposing systemic inequalities and governmental failures. Yet, amid despair, the city's spirit endured. Jazz filled the streets once more, traditions held strong, and rebuilding efforts unfolded. Slow, painful, but persistent. In Syria, the ongoing civil war since 2011 has shattered lives on a massive scale. Cities once filled with markets selling spices, fabrics, and fresh produce now bear the scars of shelling and conflict. Millions have been forced from their homes, seeking refuge across borders. Amid this turmoil, countless stories of survival emerge. Families sharing what little food they have, communities organizing underground schools, doctors treating patients in basements lit by candles. Even in quieter moments, survival can be a daily struggle. Access to clean water, steady food, and safety not guaranteed. The fragility of modern life is exposed in these human stories. They remind us that behind every statistic is a face, a name, a story of hope and hardship intertwined. Through war, disaster, and disease, humanity's capacity to endure is tested repeatedly. The legacy of those who survive is more than survival itself. It is the foundation upon which new societies are built, lessons are learned, and the future is forged. These stories are echoes of the countless near catastrophes that have shaped our past, quietly reminding us that the end of the world is often a beginning in disguise. Beyond the stories of war and natural disaster, there are quieter moments that reveal just how close humanity has come to unraveling. In the late 20th century, During the height of the Cold War, tensions between superpowers escalated to the brink of nuclear conflict several times, often due to misunderstandings, miscalculations, or sheer luck. One such moment occurred in 1983, when Soviet early warning systems detected what appeared to be an incoming missile strike from the United States. Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov, the duty officer on watch, faced a decision that would ripple through history. Protocol demanded he report the attack immediately, triggering a retaliatory strike. But something about the alert felt wrong. Petrov reasoned it might be a false alarm. Against orders, he chose not to escalate, buying precious time and potentially averting a catastrophe. The warning turned out to be a malfunction in the satellite detection system, a false alarm that could have sparked nuclear war had it been interpreted as real. Petrov's calm judgment, a single human decision in a sea of machines, exemplifies how fragile peace can be. Other incidents involved mistaken launches, misinterpreted signals, and communication breakdowns, each bringing the world dangerously close to disaster. These moments are reminders that behind every system, every machine, every protocol, there is human fallibility, and sometimes incredible courage. Even outside of war, technology itself has often posed risks we barely understood at the time. In 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear disaster revealed the terrifying consequences of design flaws, human error, and poor communication. A reactor explosion released radioactive clouds across Europe, forcing mass evacuations and exposing hundreds of thousands to radiation. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Families fled with little warning, homes were abandoned, and the health effects would echo for decades. The tragedy highlighted not only the power of technology, but also the dangers when safety and transparency are compromised. Yet, from these crises, new regulations, technologies, and awareness arose. The global community learned painful lessons about oversight, preparedness, and the limits of control. Looking at the tapestry of near catastrophes throughout history, one theme emerges. Humanity is constantly walking a tightrope, balancing innovation and risk, cooperation and conflict, resilience and vulnerability. No one knows what future dangers await, but history teaches us that the edge of the abyss is often closer than it seems, and survival depends on vigilance, wisdom, and sometimes sheer luck. In the vast tapestry of human history, moments of calm have often been punctuated by the unpredictable, events that ripple outward with consequences no one fully anticipated. Take, for example, the eruption of Krakatoa in 1883. On a quiet morning, the volcano exploded with such ferocity that the sound was heard thousands of miles away, described by some as the loudest sound ever recorded. The blast sent massive tsunamis crashing into coastal villages, wiping out entire communities. Ash and dust spewed high into the atmosphere, darkening skies globally for months and cooling temperatures, leading to disrupted harvests and food shortages around the world. For people living near the volcano, life was irrevocably changed in a matter of hours. Fishermen lost their boats, families lost their homes, and survivors faced starvation and disease. Yet stories of human endurance emerged, neighbors pulling each other from the wreckage, communities rebuilding from the ashes, and the slow return of life to the devastated islands. Natural disasters like Krakatoa remind us that Earth's power can reshape the world overnight, touching even those who live continents away through climate and economic impacts. Similarly, the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, triggered by one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded, unleashed a wave that raced across oceans, obliterating coastal towns in over a dozen countries. It killed over 230,000 people, displaced millions, and left scars that remain today. But amidst the tragedy were tales of survival. People who sensed the ocean's retreat and ran to higher ground. Villages that rebuilt through shared effort. And international aid that connected strangers in acts of compassion. These events underscore a sobering truth. While human technology and societies have advanced immensely, we remain deeply vulnerable to forces beyond our control. They also highlight the resilience and solidarity that often follow catastrophe, reminders of hope amid devastation. As we consider these moments close to an end of the world, it becomes clear that the end is rarely a single event. More often, it's a series of challenges, some sudden, some slow, that test humanity's ability to adapt and endure. In the long view, every collapse has been followed by a rebirth, but the cost is always high and the path uncertain. The question remains, as new dangers loom on the horizon, will we learn from history's lessons, or will we stumble again toward the edge? History is filled with moments where human civilization teetered on the brink, pushed there not only by nature or war, but by our own actions and decisions. One particularly chilling example occurred during the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962. For 13 tense days, the world watched as the United States and the Soviet Union stood at the edge of nuclear war. The discovery of Soviet missiles stationed just 90 miles from Florida ignited a crisis that brought leaders into intense negotiations, with fleets and bombers poised for conflict. Ordinary people went about their days with an uneasy sense of dread. Americans stocked bomb shelters with canned goods, families practiced duck and cover drills in schools, and media broadcasts carried warnings alongside the normal news. In the Soviet Union, citizens braced for possible retaliation, uncertain of what the next hours would bring. Behind closed doors, President John F. Kennedy and Premier Nikita Khrushchev exchanged messages, grappling with pride, mistrust, and the terrifying possibility of annihilation. It was a delicate dance of diplomacy and brinkmanship, where a single misstep could have triggered global catastrophe. Ultimately, both sides stepped back from the edge. The Soviet missiles were removed, and the crisis passed. But the close call left an indelible mark on the collective consciousness, a reminder of how fragile peace can be when the instruments of destruction are so readily at hand. The aftermath led to efforts like the establishment of the Moscow-Washington hotline, a direct communication link to prevent misunderstandings, and later treaties aimed at arms control. Yet, the danger never fully disappeared. The Cuban Missile Crisis exemplifies how geopolitical tensions, combined with technological capability, can bring humanity perilously close to disaster. It also shows the power of diplomacy and restraint in steering away from the abyss. Today, new geopolitical flashpoints, combined with emerging technologies, keep the risk alive, reminding us that the lessons of history must be continually revisited and respected. Amidst all the grand dramas of politics and war, there have also been quieter but no less significant brushes with disaster, moments when simple human errors nearly sparked catastrophe. Take, for example, the case of the 1995 norovirus outbreak on the cruise ship Sea Diamond. The ship had been sailing calmly through the Aegean Sea, passengers enjoying buffets laden with fresh seafood, sunbathing on deck, and attending lively performances in the ship's theaters. Then, a mysterious illness began to spread rapidly. Vomiting, diarrhea, and fever struck hundreds on board. Crew members scrambled to contain the outbreak, isolating the sick and ramping up sanitation. Yet, the virus spread with relentless speed. Norovirus, often called the winter vomiting bug, is highly contagious and notoriously difficult to eliminate once it infiltrates a closed environment like a cruise ship. The outbreak forced the Sea Diamond to cut its voyage short, returning to port amid growing alarm. Passengers recounted scenes of panic and exhaustion as medical staff struggled to treat the afflicted. Though not an apocalyptic event, this outbreak illustrated how vulnerable modern society can be to microscopic threats, how quickly normal life can be disrupted by something invisible to the naked eye. Similar outbreaks in hospitals, schools, and communities have repeatedly tested public health systems worldwide, emphasizing the critical importance of hygiene, early detection, and coordinated response. The lesson is clear. Even the smallest biological agents can challenge the complex web of modern life, reminding us that vigilance and preparedness are essential at every scale. Such stories, from nuclear near misses to viral outbreaks, weave together a portrait of a world perpetually balanced on a knife's edge, where survival depends not just on power or technology, but on humility, care, and constant watchfulness. Long before the age of satellites and instant communication, communities had their own ways of sensing and surviving impending disasters. In 1755, Lisbon, one of Europe's richest cities, experienced a tragedy that would echo across the continent and change how societies perceived catastrophe. On the morning of November 1st, All Saints' Day, a massive earthquake struck the city with unimaginable force. The The ground shook violently, toppling buildings, churches filled with worshippers collapsed, and fires ignited throughout the streets. Survivors who fled to the waterfront were met by a towering tsunami that swept through the harbor, drowning many. The devastation was staggering. Tens of thousands died, and Lisbon was nearly destroyed. The catastrophe sent shockwaves through European society, prompting philosophical and scientific debates about the nature of the world and humanity's place within it. Amid the chaos, survivors banded together to rebuild, while emergency responses evolved. The disaster spurred the first systematic studies of earthquakes, leading to advances in seismology. It also reshaped urban planning, as Lisbon was rebuilt with wider streets and earthquake-resistant architecture, pioneering concepts still used today. The Lisbon earthquake stands as a powerful reminder of nature's unpredictability and the resilience of human communities. It also marks a turning point in history, the moment when disaster began to be studied systematically rather than seen solely as divine punishment or fate. Centuries later, we continue to learn from such events, using technology and science to anticipate dangers and prepare responses. Yet, the human element, courage, cooperation, and compassion, remains at the heart of survival. In the sprawling expanse of Siberia, the Tunguska event of 1908 remains one of the most mysterious and awe-inspiring near-disasters in recorded history. On a bright summer morning, a massive explosion ripped through the sky above a remote forest, flattening an estimated 80 million trees across 830 square miles. The force was equivalent to several megatons of TNT, yet no impact crater was found. Scientists concluded that a meteoroid or comet, roughly 50 meters across, had exploded mid-air, releasing tremendous energy and shockwaves. The blast would have been enough to level a small city had it struck a populated area. Local Evenki tribes reported a sudden flash, a shockwave that knocked people off their feet, and a roaring sound louder than thunder. Animals fled, and the sky glowed with strange colors for nights afterward. Though this cosmic near-miss barely registered with the world at the time, it stands today as a stark warning. Earth's atmosphere shields us from countless small objects, but larger space rocks can cause devastation on a massive scale, and one day, an asteroid or comet could strike with catastrophic results. Efforts to monitor near-Earth objects have increased dramatically, with telescopes scanning the skies for potential threats. Missions are being planned to deflect or disrupt any object on a collision course. Yet, the possibility remains that a dangerous impact could occur with little or no warning, challenging humanity's preparedness. History is filled with countless examples of civilizations grappling with forces beyond their control, yet few moments capture humanity's brush with extinction as vividly as the story of the near-miss asteroid that could have ended it all. On April 13, 2029, an asteroid named Apophis will pass closer to Earth than some satellites orbiting our planet. Though initially feared as a potential impactor, updated calculations have ruled out collision this time. Yet, the close approach serves as a chilling reminder of the constant cosmic hazards Earth faces. Apophis measures roughly 370 meters across, large enough to cause regional devastation and global climate effects if it struck. Scientists have spent decades tracking near-Earth objects, developing early warning systems, and proposing deflection strategies. Concepts range from gravitational tractors, spacecraft that gently tug asteroids off course, to kinetic impactors that smash into them, altering their trajectories. Even nuclear explosions have been considered as last resort options. But despite technological progress, there remains uncertainty. The possibility of a surprise asteroid impact in the near future cannot be discounted. Some experts warn that a single large impact could trigger wildfires, block sunlight with dust, and collapse ecosystems, potentially threatening human survival. Such cosmic threats often feel distant or abstract, yet their potential for sudden and irreversible damage places them among the most profound dangers we face. Humanity's continued existence may depend on vigilance, international cooperation, and scientific innovation. Beyond asteroids, the universe hides other threats: gamma-ray bursts, supernovae, and solar flares, forces capable of reshaping our world or even sterilizing life. While less frequent, their sheer power dwarfs anything humans have encountered. Facing these realities, it's humbling to remember that Earth has weathered countless cataclysms, from mass extinctions to ice ages, and yet life endures. How humanity responds to current and future threats may well determine whether we join that legacy of survival or become just another vanished chapter. One of the most unpredictable forces threatening modern civilization doesn't roar or explode. It hums quietly in the background: climate change. While the effects unfold gradually over decades and centuries, the cumulative impact has the potential to upend societies around the globe, pushing ecosystems and economies to their breaking points. Imagine coastal cities, once bustling hubs of culture and commerce, slowly swallowed by rising seas. People forced to abandon homes passed down through generations, becoming climate refugees searching for new places to live. In some regions, intense droughts parch the land, turning fertile fields into dust bowls, threatening food security for millions. These changes ripple outward, fueling conflicts over water and arable land, destabilizing governments and straining international relations. As crops fail and natural disasters increase in frequency and intensity, the delicate balance of global supply chains, the invisible networks that deliver food, energy, and medicine, could falter. Yet, it is not just the environmental toll that makes climate change a threat near to apocalyptic proportions. The human response, or lack thereof, plays a critical role. Political divisions, economic interests, and misinformation often hinder the urgent collective action needed to slow or reverse damage. Meanwhile, the most vulnerable populations bear the brunt of consequences, despite contributing least to the problem. Stories from communities already grappling with changing climates offer glimpses of what lies ahead. In the Pacific Islands, rising waters threaten entire nations. In sub-Saharan Africa, shifting rainfall patterns disrupt traditional farming cycles, forcing adaptations that are not always possible. In the Arctic, melting ice reshapes ecosystems and opens new frontiers fraught with geopolitical tension. But amid these daunting challenges, efforts to innovate and adapt also emerge. Renewable energy projects, climate-resilient agriculture, and global agreements like the Paris Accord represent humanity's attempt to steer away from the precipice. The outcome depends on choices made today, reflecting a collective will to safeguard the planet for future generations. The slow, relentless march of climate change reminds us that not all existential threats explode into view suddenly. Some seep in quietly, testing our patience, resolve, and ability to cooperate across borders and cultures. History shows that societies that fail to adapt to environmental shifts often face decline or collapse. The future may well hinge on whether humanity can learn from the past and act decisively before it's too late. As the planet warms, the story of climate change is not just about numbers and graphs. It is about people, their homes, cultures, and ways of life slowly unraveling under pressure. Picture a small farming village nestled at the base of a mountain range, where generations have tilled the soil and tended orchards. The seasons once followed a reliable rhythm. Spring rains nourished seedlings, summer brought warmth, autumn yielded harvests. But in recent years, the rains have become erratic, sometimes failing altogether, sometimes arriving in violent storms that wash away precious topsoil. Families struggle to grow enough food. Young people begin to leave, seeking uncertain futures in crowded cities. Elders recall stories of past abundance, their voices tinged with sorrow and frustration. Markets once vibrant with fresh produce grow quieter. The social fabric of the community starts to fray as survival becomes the priority. Neighbors who once shared seeds and tools now compete over dwindling resources. This local picture repeats across countless regions worldwide, where climate impacts amplify existing vulnerabilities. Coastal megacities face rising tides and more frequent floods, forcing expensive and often inadequate adaptations like seawalls and drainage projects. Meanwhile, marginalized communities often remain exposed, lacking the means to relocate or fortify their homes. Beyond environmental impacts, these shifts cascade into economic and political crises. Food insecurity spikes lead to higher prices, triggering unrest in places already struggling with poverty or corruption. Refugee flows increase as people flee lands rendered unlivable by drought, desertification, or sea level rise. Countries scramble to manage borders and humanitarian aid amid growing tensions. Infrastructure faces unprecedented stress as heat waves strain power grids, storms batter roads and bridges, and water systems become unreliable. Health systems confront new challenges as diseases spread into regions previously unaffected. The intertwined nature of these crises reveals how a slowly changing climate can ripple into sudden shocks. Yet, amidst these trials, stories of resilience emerge. Farmers adopt new crop varieties better suited to changing conditions, community groups develop innovative water conservation techniques, and local knowledge blends with modern science to create adaptive solutions. Cities invest in green infrastructure, prioritizing public transport and renewable energy to reduce emissions and improve quality of life. International cooperation becomes critical, though often fraught with complexity. Agreements like the Paris Accord aim to unite nations in limiting temperature rise, but political will waxes and wanes. Economic interests and national priorities sometimes clash with the urgent need for global action. Meanwhile, grassroots movements, led by young people, indigenous communities, and activists, push for accountability and change, reminding the world that the future belongs to those who dare to demand it. This unfolding story is far from over. The next decades will be pivotal, as humanity's choices determine whether the planet stabilizes or spirals toward more severe disruption. The challenge is not just scientific or technological. It is profoundly social and ethical, demanding empathy, justice, and shared responsibility. History shows that societies ignoring environmental limits often face collapse, but it also teaches that transformation is possible. The question is whether we can muster the courage and cooperation needed to write a different ending, one where people and planet thrive together. As the slow clock of climate change ticks forward, the fate of millions hangs in the balance, shaped by actions taken in boardrooms, villages, and everyday lives across the globe. As climate change reshapes the physical world, it also stresses the invisible threads holding societies together: trust, cooperation, and shared purpose. In many regions, the slow unfolding of environmental shifts reveals fractures long hidden beneath the surface of daily life. Economic inequalities widen, political polarization intensifies, and social unrest simmers. Consider a sprawling megacity where millions live packed in dense neighborhoods, their lives dependent on complex systems of water delivery, electricity, and food imports. When a severe drought strikes the surrounding region, reservoirs drop to critical lows. Water rationing becomes necessary. At first, the government promises equitable distribution, but as days pass, tensions rise. Wealthier districts maintain access to clean water through private tanks and bottled supplies, while poorer areas face cutoffs and contaminated sources. Fights break out at water stations. Protests flare in the streets. Social media floods with anger, conspiracy theories, and calls for action. The government struggles to maintain order, torn between enforcing restrictions and addressing growing humanitarian needs. Meanwhile, food prices surge as droughts and floods disrupt harvests across the country and beyond. Markets become volatile. Street vendors who once thrived selling fresh fruits and vegetables now watch customers dwindle. Children go hungry. Families skip meals. Desperation fuels crime and migration. In such moments, communities either fracture or find ways to come together. Neighborhood groups organize water-sharing cooperatives, pooling resources and knowledge. Religious leaders call for peace and solidarity. Local innovators develop low-cost water purification devices and urban gardens. These acts of resilience provide a flicker of hope amid uncertainty. Beyond the immediate crisis, these pressures test the legitimacy and effectiveness of institutions. Governments face the dual challenge of managing emergencies while implementing long-term adaptations, building resilient infrastructure, reforming policies, and engaging citizens in decision-making. Where governance fails, non-state actors, NGOs, grassroots organizations, even private companies step in, filling gaps but sometimes also complicating power dynamics. On the global stage, resource scarcity and displacement strain international relations. Neighboring countries contest shared water sources, Refugee influxes challenge border controls and humanitarian aid. Diplomatic tensions rise, and in some regions, conflicts erupt. At the same time, global initiatives continue to seek cooperation, aiming to balance national interests with collective survival. Climate finance mechanisms, technology transfers, and joint disaster preparedness programs represent efforts to share burdens and knowledge. Yet, progress is often slow and contested. Political cycles, economic competition, and misinformation campaigns hinder unified responses. The social media age accelerates the spread of both awareness and falsehoods, making consensus harder to achieve. Amid this turbulence, the human spirit endures. Stories of courage, creativity, and empathy unfold daily. Neighbors caring for the vulnerable, scientists racing to innovate, youth activists mobilizing millions. These efforts may not erase the enormity of the challenge, but they reveal a fundamental truth. Humanity's survival depends as much on compassion and collaboration as on technology and policy. Looking ahead, the convergence of climate change, social upheaval, and geopolitical tensions paints a complex and uncertain picture. The path forward is neither predetermined nor simple. It is shaped by choices, some monumental, many small, that together will define whether civilization adapts and thrives or stumbles toward decline. History, with its cycles of collapse and renewal, offers both warnings and lessons. It reminds us that crises are rarely isolated. They cascade through interconnected systems, magnifying effects. But it also shows that resilience is possible, rooted in collective action, innovation, and the enduring human capacity to hope. In the end, the greatest near-apocalyptic threats may not be single cataclysms but the slow, entwined unraveling of ecological, social, and political stability. A call to vigilance, empathy, and urgent action in a world increasingly at risk. Amid these mounting pressures, the fragile balance of global health systems faces unprecedented challenges. Pandemics, once sporadic and localized, have become ever more frequent and far-reaching in a world connected by rapid travel and dense urban centers. The story of COVID-19 in 2020 stands as a stark reminder of how quickly an invisible enemy can ripple through the globe. Initially identified in a bustling city market, the virus spread silently through international hubs, exploiting human mobility and social interconnectedness. In cities and rural areas alike, people found their routines upended. Schools closed, businesses shuttered, streets emptied. Hospitals strained under the weight of the sick, with shortages of beds, ventilators, and protective equipment exposing vulnerabilities in healthcare infrastructure. Medical workers faced exhaustion and risk, becoming both heroes and symbols of systemic fragility. Families grappled with isolation, fear, and grief as the virus tore through communities. The economic fallout was immense. Global supply chains disrupted, millions lost jobs, and governments scrambled to balance public health measures with economic survival. Political polarization intensified, with debates over masks, vaccines, and lockdowns reflecting deeper social divides. Yet, alongside tragedy emerged stories of resilience and innovation. Scientists raced to develop vaccines at unprecedented speed, leveraging decades of research and international cooperation. Community organizations delivered food and support to vulnerable populations. Technology enabled remote work and education, bridging gaps amid physical separation. The pandemic exposed both the strengths and weaknesses of global systems, revealing how interconnected and vulnerable humanity truly is. It underscored the need for robust preparedness, equitable healthcare access, and transparent communication. Looking beyond COVID-19, experts warn that other pathogens, some known, others yet to emerge, pose ongoing risks, especially as human activity disrupts natural ecosystems and increases contact with wildlife. Zoonotic diseases, transmitted from animals to humans, may become more common as forests are cleared and habitats shrink. Global efforts to monitor and respond to infectious diseases continue to evolve, emphasizing rapid detection, data sharing, and coordinated responses. Still, these systems require sustained investment and trust among nations, which can be challenging amid geopolitical tensions. The story of pandemics is thus intertwined with larger narratives of environmental change, social inequality, and political will. It is a reminder that health security is not solely a medical issue but a complex web of factors influencing humanity's survival. In the shadow of these challenges, the human capacity to adapt and innovate shines through, but the stakes have never been higher. The line between containment and catastrophe remains thin, demanding vigilance, cooperation, and humility in the face of nature's unpredictability. As history unfolds, the lessons of past pandemics urge preparedness and compassion, highlighting that the fate of civilizations may rest as much on unity as on scientific progress. Beyond pandemics, another invisible and insidious threat to humanity's future lies beneath our feet, in the fragile web of Earth's ecosystems that sustain life itself. These systems, from forests and wetlands to oceans and grasslands, provide essential services, purifying air and water, regulating climate, pollinating crops, and supporting biodiversity. Yet, human activities have pushed many of these natural systems to the brink. Take the Amazon rainforest, often called the lungs of the planet. For millennia, it has absorbed vast amounts of carbon dioxide, helping to stabilize global temperatures. Indigenous communities have lived there for generations, deeply connected to the land, managing it with traditional knowledge. However, logging, agriculture, mining, and infrastructure development have accelerated deforestation. Fires rage across large swaths, sometimes set intentionally to clear land, sometimes sparked by drought and heat. The loss of forest cover does more than reduce carbon absorption. It disrupts rainfall patterns, threatens countless species, and endangers indigenous ways of life. Scientists warn the Amazon is approaching a tipping point, a transition from dense rainforest to savanna-like landscapes. This shift would have profound consequences for global climate and biodiversity. Similarly, coral reefs, vibrant underwater cities of life, face unprecedented threats from warming seas and ocean acidification. These ecosystems harbor extraordinary diversity and protect coastlines from storms. Yet bleaching events, where corals lose their symbiotic algae, have become more frequent and severe. Entire reefs have died off, unraveling the marine food web and impacting fisheries that millions rely on for sustenance. Wetlands and peatlands, which store vast amounts of carbon and support rich biodiversity, are drained and degraded worldwide. The disappearance of these habitats releases stored greenhouse gases and reduces natural flood controls, increasing vulnerability to extreme weather. The erosion of these natural systems is not only an environmental crisis but a social one. The loss affects food security, water availability, cultural heritage, and economic livelihoods, disproportionately impacting marginalized communities who depend directly on natural resources. Efforts to protect and restore ecosystems have grown in recent years, emphasizing conservation, sustainable land management, and the rights of indigenous peoples. Initiatives like reforestation projects, marine protected areas, and regenerative agriculture offer hope. Yet, scaling these efforts to the levels needed to halt or reverse degradation remains daunting. Underlying these challenges is a fundamental tension between short-term economic gains and long-term planetary health. Extractive industries, consumer demands, and global trade often incentivize destruction over stewardship. Changing this trajectory demands shifts in policies, markets, and societal values, complex, contentious, but vital. As humanity grapples with the intertwined crises of climate, health, and social stability, the fate of Earth's ecosystems emerges as a critical front. Their health is inseparable from our own, a silent foundation supporting all life. History shows that civilizations ignoring environmental limits face collapse. The current global ecological crisis is a stark warning, urging urgent action and deep reflection. Amid these challenges, stories of community-led restoration, scientific breakthroughs, and evolving environmental ethics inspire cautious optimism. The path forward is neither easy nor guaranteed, but the resilience and creativity of people around the world offer glimmers of hope. In this unfolding story, the question is not only how we survive but how we choose to live, and what legacy we leave for generations yet to come. Amid the mounting ecological crises, one of the most profound challenges lies in the oceans. vast, mysterious, and vital to life on Earth. Covering more than 70% of the planet's surface, oceans regulate climate, produce oxygen, and sustain fisheries feeding billions. Yet, they are under siege from pollution, overfishing, acidification, and warming. In this unfolding story, the question is not only how we survive but how we choose to live, and what legacy we leave for generations yet to come. Amid the mounting ecological crises, one of the most profound challenges lies in the oceans, vast, mysterious, and vital to life on Earth. Covering more than 70% of the planet's surface, oceans regulate climate, produce oxygen, and sustain fisheries feeding billions. Yet, they are under siege from pollution, overfishing, acidification, and warming. Imagine a small fishing village on the coast of Southeast Asia, where generations have relied on the sea's bounty. Early morning see fishermen pushing out on wooden boats, nets cast with practiced hands to catch sardines, mackerel, or shrimp. The markets buzz as fresh catches are sold to families and traders. Seafood is central to diet and culture, with dishes seasoned by coastal herbs and communal meals shared with laughter and stories. But over time, the catches have dwindled. Nets return lighter, fish migrate to cooler waters, coral reefs that once sheltered juvenile fish bleach and die. The sea, once generous, feels unpredictable. Fishermen adapt, traveling farther, using new technologies, but risks grow with each journey. Economic uncertainty spreads as incomes shrink and younger generations question whether to stay or seek other livelihoods in distant cities. Meanwhile, plastic pollution blankets coastlines and accumulates in gyres, massive rotating currents where debris concentrates. Sea turtles mistake bags for jellyfish, whales ingest microplastics, and plankton, the ocean's foundation, absorb toxins. Chemical runoff from agriculture and industry creates dead zones, areas depleted of oxygen where marine life cannot survive. Ocean acidification, caused by the absorption of excess atmospheric CO2, threatens the very building blocks of marine ecosystems. Creatures with calcium carbonate shells, like corals, mollusks, and some plankton, find it harder to grow and reproduce. The decline of these species disrupts food webs and fisheries, imperiling both biodiversity and human nutrition. These ecological shifts cascade into social and economic upheaval. Coastal communities face food insecurity, loss of cultural heritage, and displacement as rising sea levels encroach on lands. Governments grapple with managing marine resources, enforcing fishing regulations, and mitigating environmental damage. Conflicts sometimes arise over maritime boundaries and access to dwindling stocks. Yet, amid these challenges, efforts to protect and restore ocean health are gaining momentum. Marine protected areas, no-fishing zones, and coral reef restoration projects demonstrate what coordinated action can achieve. Innovative technologies monitor ocean health and track illegal fishing. Indigenous knowledge offers valuable insights into sustainable stewardship. International cooperation is crucial, as oceans do not adhere to political borders. Agreements like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 14 aim to conserve and sustainably use marine resources. But enforcement and funding remain hurdles. The story of the oceans today is a microcosm of the broader environmental crisis, complex, interconnected, and deeply human. It challenges us to rethink our relationship with nature, balance exploitation with conservation, and embrace stewardship as a collective responsibility. History teaches that the health of oceans has always been intertwined with the fate of civilizations, from ancient maritime cultures to modern economies. Protecting these waters is not just an environmental imperative but a matter of survival and identity. As the waves continue their eternal rhythm, carrying both peril and promise, humanity faces a defining choice: to heed the warnings, act with urgency and wisdom, and safeguard the oceans for future generations, or to risk losing one of Earth's most precious and life-sustaining treasures. Amid the immense challenges that threaten humanity's future, technological advancements have offered both hope and new uncertainties. The rapid development of artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and automation promises to reshape societies in profound ways. But with great power comes great risk, unintended consequences that could push civilization closer to collapse or transformation. Picture a bustling metropolis a few decades from now. Self-driving vehicles glide silently through streets lined with towering green skyscrapers, powered by renewable energy. Drones deliver packages overhead, and robots perform tasks ranging from cleaning to construction. Medical advances enable personalized treatments through gene editing and nanotechnology, dramatically extending lifespans. Yet beneath this veneer of progress, social tensions simmer. Automation replaces millions of jobs, disrupting traditional economies and exacerbating inequalities. While some benefit from new industries and opportunities, many find themselves displaced and marginalized. The digital divide deepens as access to technology and education remains uneven. Misinformation spreads rapidly through hyperconnected networks, fueling polarization and eroding trust in institutions. Biotechnological breakthroughs bring unprecedented capabilities but also ethical dilemmas. Gene editing raises questions about designer babies, biological weapons, and unintended ecological impacts. AI systems, while powerful, can perpetuate biases and be weaponized in cyber warfare or surveillance. The concentration of technological power in the hands of a few corporations or governments raises concerns about privacy, control, and democracy. The rapid pace of innovation challenges societies to adapt laws, norms, and values in real time, often struggling to keep up. Regulatory frameworks lag behind developments, creating gaps exploited for profit or power. Public debates over technology's role and limits become battlegrounds for competing visions of the future. Yet, technology also offers tools to address existential risks. AI can enhance climate modeling and disaster response. Biotech can combat diseases and improve food security. Automation can free humans from dangerous or monotonous labor. Digital platforms enable global collaboration on pressing problems. Navigating this double-edged sword requires wisdom, foresight, and inclusive dialogue. Societies must grapple with questions of who benefits, who is left behind, and how to balance innovation with ethical responsibility. Education, transparency, and participation become critical components of resilience. History shows that technological revolutions bring both disruption and renewal. The Industrial Revolution transformed economies and societies but also generated new social movements and political reforms. The Information Age redefined communication and power structures but introduced vulnerabilities alongside empowerment. In this unfolding chapter, humanity stands at another crossroads, where choices about technology's development and deployment may tip the balance toward flourishing or fragility. The stakes are immense, affecting not only survival but the very meaning of what it is to be human. As the pace of change accelerates, the need for humility, ethics, and global cooperation grows. The future remains unwritten, shaped by the actions and values of individuals and communities worldwide. In the mosaic of human history, pandemics, climate change, wars, and technological upheavals often intertwine, creating complex crises that challenge the very fabric of civilization. As the 21st century progresses, one emerging threat exemplifies this convergence: the growing scarcity of fresh water. Water, the essence of life, flows through rivers and aquifers, sustains crops and livestock, and powers industries. Yet, more than 2 billion people worldwide face water stress, where demand outpaces sustainable supply. Regions once fertile and vibrant now endure prolonged droughts, while others grapple with polluted or salinized sources. Imagine the vast expanse of the Indus River Basin, where millions depend on glacial meltwaters and seasonal rains. Rising temperatures accelerate glacier retreat, altering river flows and reducing availability during dry months. Farmers struggle to irrigate fields that once flourished with wheat, rice, and cotton. Food insecurity rises, pushing vulnerable communities toward poverty and migration. In cities from Cape Town to Sao Paulo, day zero scenarios where taps run dry have become a looming nightmare. Urban planners scramble to secure alternative sources, enforce conservation, and upgrade infrastructure often plagued by leaks and inefficiency. But socioeconomic inequalities mean not all benefit equally. Informal settlements often lack reliable access, exacerbating health risks and social tensions. Water scarcity fuels geopolitical disputes as nations contest shared river basins and groundwater reserves. The Nile, Euphrates, and Mekong rivers flow through multiple countries, each with competing needs and priorities. Diplomatic efforts to negotiate fair and sustainable water sharing have met mixed success, sometimes giving way to conflict or brinkmanship. In rural areas, the absence of water disrupts daily life profoundly. Women and children often bear the burden of collecting water, walking miles under harsh conditions. Schools and clinics close or operate with limited hygiene, increasing vulnerability to disease. Cultural practices tied to water sources face threat, unraveling traditions passed through generations. Technological and natural solutions offer partial relief. Desalination plants convert seawater to fresh water but are energy-intensive and expensive. Rainwater harvesting, improved irrigation, and wastewater recycling reduce pressure on sources. Ecosystem restoration helps protect watersheds and maintain natural filtration. Yet, addressing water scarcity requires systemic change. Sustainable management, equitable access, pollution control, and climate mitigation are critical. Public awareness and behavioral shifts, from reducing waste to embracing conservation, are vital. The narrative of water scarcity illustrates how environmental changes ripple through social, economic, and political realms. It embodies the interconnectedness of Earth systems and human societies, where disruption in one domain cascades into others. History warns that water scarcity can precipitate migration, conflict, and societal collapse. Ancient civilizations from Mesopotamia to the Maya faced decline linked to water mismanagement or drought. Today, with billions depending on fragile supplies, the stakes are unprecedented. Yet, water also symbolizes hope and renewal. It connects people and ecosystems, supports life's diversity, and inspires cultural expression. Efforts to safeguard water resources reflect humanity's capacity to care for shared heritage and secure a sustainable future. As we confront the escalating challenges of water scarcity, the story reminds us that survival depends not only on natural endowments but on governance, equity, and collective will. The future of water, and by extension of civilization, hangs in the balance shaped by choices made at every level, from local communities to international bodies. As we come to the close of this journey through humanity's closest brushes with the end of the world, it is clear that the threats we face are as varied as they are interconnected. From the sudden terror of a nuclear near-miss to the slow creep of climate change, from cosmic impacts to microscopic viruses, history reveals a persistent dance on the edge of catastrophe. Yet, these stories are not simply tales of doom. They are chronicles of survival, resilience, and the enduring human spirit. Through wars and peace, disasters and recoveries, our species has repeatedly demonstrated a remarkable capacity to learn, adapt, and rebuild. What emerges from this vast tapestry is a profound truth. The greatest dangers are often those we create ourselves, through conflict, environmental degradation, or neglect. But equally, the greatest hope lies in the choices we make today and tomorrow. The path forward demands courage, not the reckless kind that pushes us toward destruction, but the thoughtful bravery to face uncomfortable realities, to collaborate across differences, and to innovate beyond old paradigms. It requires humility to recognize that despite all our advances, we remain part of a complex web of life, dependent on the delicate balance of Earth's systems. As you lie down to rest tonight, consider the invisible threads connecting every life on this planet. Threads woven from air and water, history and memory, choice and chance. The future is unwritten, shaped by actions both monumental and small, by decisions in boardrooms and quiet moments alike. There is no final end of the world event foretold in history. Rather, there are countless tipping points, crossroads where humanity must choose between stewardship and neglect, division and unity, despair and hope. The resilience of civilizations past reminds us that collapse is not inevitable, but survival is not guaranteed. Each generation inherits this legacy, a world rich with beauty and danger, promise and peril. What we do with it defines not only our fate, but the fate of all who come after. So, as you drift into sleep, Let this story be a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the possibility of dawn remains. That amid uncertainty, resilience endures. That the world's future rests in our hands, fragile, precious, and filled with potential. Good night.